Welcome to the Nestled Podcast. I'm April.
And I'm Bailey. We are friends and neighbors who left our design business to champion a message of hospitality.
We live in a time where deep connections are so hard to come by.
But we want no part of that.
Our desire is for people around us to be seen, heard, and known.
And we want to take you on that journey with us.
So come back each week to take a peek in our nest.
As always, the door will be open.
Today we have Ashley Newell. How are you, Ashley?
I'm good. How are y'all?
Good.
We're good. We're so excited to talk to you today, especially after we've had our little hiatus.
I know.
It's our first interview back.
First one back.
So you get to be our guinea pig to see if we've still got it.
Well, thank y'all for having me.
Of course.
Yeah.
So to start us off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. I met my husband Herbie at Samford University, and he was actually my Bible study leader. Some people laugh about that and say, was that rigged in some sort of way? But it was a random co-ed Bible study that I found myself in. And we started dating my second semester of my freshman year, and then we got married 3.5 years later. And after college, I started working at Save a Life, which is a local crisis pregnancy center here in Birmingham. And in college, I had volunteered there and then done an internship there. And so my heart was really stirred there for the vulnerable and for birth mothers. And so Herbie was working as an accountant, and every night, we'd come home for dinner and I'd say, well, what'd you do today? And he'd say, I crunched some numbers and there's not really anything else exciting to tell you. And I would have the opportunity to tell him about the girls that I had met with and the conversations that I had had. And so through all of that, our hearts just began to be stirred for orphans and vulnerable children. Then about 3 years later, I had my first child, Caleb. He's 14 now. And then I had Adeline, she's 12, and Emily is 9. So that's a little bit about our family.
And so what does Herbie do now?
Okay, so now he is the executive director of Lifeline Children's Services. He's been there for 17 years. And through my involvement with Save a Life, we learned about Lifeline. And through the Lord's work and intervention, and it just really pricking our hearts, that's how it led him over to Lifeline.
The reason that I bring that up is because Lifeline has grown so much under his leadership and your leadership as his partner from the small adoption agency that it once was. And we adopted through Lifeline, but one reason that we chose Lifeline is the holistic view they have for orphan care, and that it's not just about getting kids for families.
Right.
In fact, I think the perspective is much more like finding the right family for kids, but then also the passion that they have for birth families and the kids who maybe aren't going to have the opportunity to be adopted. So can you kind of do a quick rundown just about Lifeline and the different programs they have? Because I think a lot of people don't realize all that Lifeline does. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the heart of Lifeline, I would say, comes from James 1:27, which just says that pure and undefiled religion is to care for widows and orphans in their distress and to keep oneself unstained from the world. And so through that, we see that the call on a believer's life is very clear to care for orphan and vulnerable children. And we believe that can look different in each person's life. So it's a command to care for them in some way. And then we feel like that there is a specific call on specific people's lives to adopt. So just because your family may not be called to adopt doesn't mean that there's not something you as a believer can do in order to care for orphans and vulnerable children. And so our mission at Lifeline is just to equip the body of Christ to manifest the gospel to orphans and vulnerable children. And we do that in 4 main areas. So obviously the first one, like you said, when people think about Lifeline, they probably think about adoption. Mm-hmm. And so we have international adoption and domestic adoption. For international, we work in 18 different countries. And of course, each process looks different according to that country. And then we also do domestic adoption. So that means that we work with birth mothers. And through that, we also do a lot of counseling because that, as you can imagine, is a very vulnerable spot for that woman to be in. And so we want to handle her with care, and we want to make sure that she feels loved and that she knows her value and her worth as a child of God, not that just we happen to be, interested in that she is carrying a child, but that she also has worth and value. And so the domestic team does a great job of walking with these women, not only for the 9 months of their pregnancy, but also afterwards as well. Mm-hmm. And so then we also have counseling for families. So sometimes when families have adopted children from hard places, which every adoption is a child from a hard place because they've been separated from their birth family, those children with trauma in their background oftentimes need counseling. So we have a counseling department that comes alongside families and children and helps them through some of those difficulties. And then we have unadopted. And with unadopted, that started, I'm not exactly sure, I can't remember how many years ago, maybe 8 years ago. My husband was in the country of Ukraine, and there was a girl there who was aging out of the orphanage at 16. And so my husband inquired about her, what is she going to do when she leaves here? And the orphanage director basically said, I don't know. I mean, I'm handing her the equivalent of $20 and saying, have a nice life. Yeah. And he said, I can't see that and then not be moved to action. Mm-hmm. And so that's what started Unadopted, which is helping to develop life skills and job skills for these orphans while they're still in an orphanage, so that once they're released from the orphanage, that they will have a marketable skill that they can do. And it's to help them know, again, the love of Christ and that they are valued, and to hopefully, share the gospel with them, and so that they will not be caught up into, human trafficking or drugs or that type of thing.
So, and that's in a number of countries now, right? It's not just in Ukraine.
So it's 14 different countries. And again, it looks different according to that country's culture and regulations and things like that.
Right.
So,
yeah, I love to hear you, your story of even how you got to, how Herbie got to Lifeline, and how your passion kind of sparked that in him. I think that a lot of times as women, I know my husband's a pastor, and so our life and ministry has always been very much together. And oftentimes you see men who are the face of something, and you don't really recognize that behind the scenes often is a wife who is passionate and love the ministry that her husband is a part of. And so it's really cool to hear that it was, from your passion at Save a Life that kind of sparked this thing that has turned into what God has been able to do through Lifeline. And so I just think that's really neat to hear your perspective on that, because I know often, not that, there's a desire for praise there necessarily, but I do think that the saying of behind every great man is a strong woman. Right. I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And so it's really cool to hear from you today. And I just think it's really cool that God gave you that heart as well. And how important it is to have a woman's perspective for families and children. Because I know my husband often sees the practical working out of things, but he doesn't always see the things that as a mother and a wife that I see and feel. Right. So.
Right. Well, thank really you. Cool. Yeah, right. I'm a slightly passionate person.
Yeah, us too. So it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And then y'all also do the Families Count classes now, right?
Yes, which that is family restoration. Yes, for families who have lost their children into the foster care system, and so it's a class that they come to. It's an educational class, and it's all run through the local church, which fits into our mission of equipping the body of Christ to do the work. Yeah. And so families come to these classes, and they're fed, and they're fed physically. They're also fed spiritually, and most of the time they are ended up reunited back with their families.
Yes, we love that. Especially Justin and I feel really passionate about that, because if we could, we love our daughter, and we're so glad she's our daughter, but we feel like if we could have just gotten resources into her mother's hands years ago, maybe she could have avoided so much of the trauma that she experienced. Right. So our church is going to be starting that up here in Mobile soon, so if anyone wants to get involved in that, you know where to find us, because we can use help. Yeah, and that's awesome. It's hopefully preventative orphan care, getting on the front end of it, so and important. Helping families so that orphans aren't created. And that's right. Every adoption is birthed out of some kind of brokenness, and adoption is beautiful and wonderful, but it comes because it's a broken world. Right.
That's right.
So, right. Okay, so today we're going to get to hear all about Stand For Orphans. And I think a lot of people are going to be excited to hear about this who are listening, because we have a lot of listeners who have small kids, who are at home with them, and a lot of the guests that come on, they hear the things that they're doing and feel like it's this grandiose thing, but what can I do? What can I do right now? And this is such a practical thing.
Yeah.
Right.
That families, singles, couples, whoever could participate in, but especially those with kids.
Yeah.
And so can you tell us about how Stand For Orphans started?
Sure. So it started very simply. One day in a hot summer, just like the one we're in now, my kids came to me. It was about 4 years ago, and they said, "Can we please do a lemonade stand today?" And I felt like every single time they asked, I said, "No, no, no, no." And so that day I said yes, and it was very simple, just some, mix, a lemonade mix that we found in our pantry, and we went down to a park, and, I wish I could tell you we raised $2,000 that day, but I think it was about 20. But while we were sitting there waiting on customers, our kids just started talking about, okay, this was not a hard thing to do. This is a doable thing. And so it was just like this mini brainstorming session. And one kid said, well, what if we challenged other kids to do this? And another child said, well, what if we could find a donor that could match everything that we raised today and maybe match everything that other kids raised? And so just through that brainstorming session, that's how Stand For Orphans was birthed. And we talked to my husband when we got home from work, and we called Rick Morton at Lifeline. And then that night we actually bought the domain standfororphans.com and standfororphans.org. And so just a very simple idea that can be, that's easily duplicated by others.
You got passionate children too, huh? Yeah. It's a family ministry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I love that you actually listened to your kids and gave them a voice and a chance to do something that matters. I think that it's so easy to, I don't want to say ignore our kids, but, just go play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that one too.
Yeah, and so I love that.
Yes.
And so for someone who wants to participate, what do they need to do? What should they sell at the stands? Give them the 411 on how it works.
Okay, so we've tried to make it as easy as possible because, like you said, we're all busy moms, and we don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel. So if you'll just go to that website that I said, the standfororphans.com website, and there is a free downloadable kit there. And it has everything that you need to do your stand. Your kids can color a banner. There's printouts there, all kinds of things that are resources there. And then you can just set up your stand. And I will say that setting it up in an area where you already have foot traffic is a great thing. The last thing you want is for your kids to sit there in the hot sun and then not have any customers. So something like a place that has a lot of people coming to it. And Stand is not only a summer initiative, but it's also a year-round initiative, meaning where football season is upon us. And so whether that is at a Alabama football game or at a local football game, that would be a great place to set up a stand. Also, a lot of back-to-school events are going on right now, and I know of one family who set up a tent at a back-to-school event. You've got fall festivals, people still doing yard sales, maybe even you have an event at your school, carpool line, anything like that is a great way to do it at this time of year. So I just encourage people not to think that, oh, well, it's the end of summer, so I've missed my chance for this year. You can do it any time of year. And goodness, we know in the South it stays hot forever.
I was going to say we've got several more months of heat to really appreciate the lemonade.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got a number of ideas whenever you just said that, because we haven't done ours yet. And I was like, oh, we could do a South game. That's a great idea.
At the tailgate. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, last year at our lemonade stand, we just did it on our little street and raised $200. So,
that's awesome.
The Nextdoor app.
Yes.
I was going to say
Yes.
that. We just put it on the Nextdoor app. We get some foot traffic on our street, but not a ton. But we put it on the Nextdoor app, and so many people that came by said, we saw this on the app. We saw your post.
that's great.
Come by.
And some people made donations because of that, too. So just try to think outside of the box as far as, like, what are ways that people are already hearing about things and, you know, and kind of get it out that way.
There's also a way on the Stand for Orphans page, if someone wants to donate directly, if they are listening and they don't think they'll make it to a stand or whatever, they can go to that and donate. And I also wanted to mention that we have a generous donor who is providing a $35,000 match. So every dollar raised up to $35,000 will be matched.
Is there anything else about that you wanted to?
Well, I would just say to encourage people not to limit themselves necessarily to lemonade. It could be anything. I mean, you can also do baked goods like cookies and cupcakes. I've seen kids make bracelets to sell or slime to sell. There was one family here who they were really good at woodworking, and so they made birdhouses and things like that. I just noticed on the Stand page online, on the Facebook page, that there was a child who decided instead of having birthday gifts that he wanted to have a Stand for Orphans birthday party. So they used the theme colors of the blue and the yellow. And then instead of having gifts, people donated to Stand. So that is just precious.
I saw that post yesterday, and we did a birthday party for my 2-year-old this weekend, and we didn't know what to do. And I was like, "Dadgummit, that was a great idea. I wish I
saw the lemon I've already had."
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You could also do like hot chocolate in the winter,
right?
In the winter,
like
apple cider. Coffee for the parents, you know.
Yeah, we like to celebrate, I'm probably always butcher this, but Dia de las Velitas. It's a Day of Little Candles. It's a Colombian holiday in December.
Awesome.
And so I was thinking that may be a great opportunity there, too. To like sell some hot chocolate whenever we set up all the little candles outside. And Maisie would probably love that. So anyway, my wheels are turning.
Yeah, for sure.
Ideas brewing that we can do for this year, because we have not done it in the hot sun yet.
It's been real toasty.
Yes.
But we're going to get there.
Yeah, we're going to get there for sure.
Okay. So moving beyond the Stand, how can we raise children in our homes and the children that we have in our communities with a global perspective? Because our world is very self-centered. So how do we shift that perspective with our children?
I think it starts with awareness. So just talking to your children about the fact that there are 153 million orphans in the world that need our help, and less than 0.5% of them will ever be adopted. So basically, there's still going to be 153 million orphans in the world, and that's a large number. But trying to help them understand how many children that represents, that behind each of those numbers is a child just like you, except for they live in an orphanage and they don't have a mom or a dad. And so learning information about kids around the world, and just like I said, talking about it at home and praying for them. And I know that may sound like a trite answer of praying for them, but it's true that there may not be anyone praying for that specific country at that moment. And my family has had the privilege of being able to travel a lot with Herbie because, you know, of his position at Lifeline. And so I would just say, if you have the opportunity to travel, most definitely take it. It just allows your children to be able to see that not everyone lives the same way that we live, and giving them that global perspective. And hopefully that will foster in them empathy and compassion. And so I just think of a story. We were in Colombia last summer, and we were actually in a special needs orphanage, and it was difficult. It was difficult for me. It was difficult for my children. Most of the kids in there were nonverbal, and so my kids came up and they said, "Mom, we don't know what to do right now." And I said, "You know, baby, I don't either. I don't know the best way to interact with these kids, but here's what I can tell you, that I guarantee you that there's no one in the world right now praying for this child that's standing right here beside you. And so I want each of you to find one child in this room. And if you want to pray out loud for them, that's fine. If not, I just want you to go stand beside them, put your hand on them, and pray for them." And so, like I said, I know it can sound like a trite answer of, yeah, we need to pray for the orphans, but it's true. So whether that means in your home you decide, okay, today we're going to pray for the orphans of Ukraine, and then the next day we're going to pray for the children of Colombia, or whatever it is, but to actually encourage them to do that. One resource that we have used a lot in our family is a book called Window on the World, and they can link it in the show notes. But it tells a story about children that live in different countries, and sometimes it's divided by people groups, and then sometimes by countries. And so you just read the little story about the child living in that country, and then it gives you prayer points. And I would just like to point out that even if that book doesn't say pray for the orphans in this country, there are orphans and vulnerable children in every single country in the world, including ours.
Right.
So that's just one way that you can incorporate that in your home and encourage your children to think outside of themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that oftentimes the perspective of other people not necessarily being born in the same type of privilege, I don't know any other word really to use than that, is used as a way to shame children. And like, there are children without food and you're not eating your food. Right. Or, you know, like, you don't appreciate anything, you little brat, and you're, you know, like, I gave you this stuff and you're not thankful. But the shift in our mindset of like, no, this is like it's a lifestyle of seeing people. It's a lifestyle of recognizing that any gifts that we have, any good gifts that we have are from the Lord, but they're also used to be used in our life as a resource to love people and to love Him and to show Him to the world. And so just keeping that mindset, because I think the easy thing is for us to go, my children have no idea how good they've got it. And then we almost shame our kids. But I don't think that that's the approach that any of us need to have, even though that sometimes, I mean, I do get mad at my kids at times of like, you're being very entitled and you don't see the bigger picture here. But it has to be a shift in the entire way that we live and we talk and we interact with people, even in our own communities and at our own dinner tables and around our own prayer time.
Right. Well, and I think the truth of it is, if we're honest with ourselves, we're all really self-centered too. And so whenever we put into practice, like, okay, I'm going to be passionate about teaching my kids to see others and about letting my kid know that, like, America isn't the only country that matters, and the kids in America aren't the only, like, all kids matter and all people matter. When we put that into practice, it reminds ourselves of that too. Right.
Absolutely.
And, you know, make sure that our eyes are on Jesus and on His people.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Just that Jesus, I try to remind our children, Jesus calls us to go to the outcast and the downtrodden and the vulnerable. And I think of Isaiah 1:17 that says, learn to do good, seek justice, defend the orphan. And that Jesus moved with compassion and that He saw people and that He saw needs. And just helping them in trying to be like Christ. That's one way that we can be like Christ.
Right. And I think that one of the biggest ways we can change that perspective is to change our own perspective and model it. Because oftentimes we're like, we want our kids to be this, this, and this. And how much of that are we actually doing ourselves?
Right.
And how much of our time is self-centered and how much of our time is other-centered.
Right.
And how much of our prayers are self-centered and how much is other-centered.
Right.
And so in that, I think that, man, modeling it goes a lot further than preaching it at times.
So for families who are wanting to kind of dive into this, do you have any other resources?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're listening to this and you are in some type of church leadership, or even if you're just a member at a church and you think, oh, I'd love for my church to get involved with that, we have a church kit online, and there's also a media kit. And so on the media kit, there are talking points for pastors, there are bulletin inserts. There's a lot of different ways that churches can get involved. So if you just go to that standfororphans.com page, you can also download that there. And then Orphan Sunday is coming up, and it's an initiative that they've set aside a specific day, November the 9th. But again, a church could do it anytime. It doesn't have to be on November the 9th. But that would be a perfect time for anyone to do a stand at their church, would be on Orphan Sunday. So I just wanted to mention that. But back to other resources, I mentioned the Window on the World book. And the other thing that we've enjoyed as a family is something called Families of the World. And it's actually a series that used to be on PBS. And they have families of the world for a bunch of different countries. And so it'll be like, families of Colombia. And you would follow, there's 2 episodes on there. There's a child who lives in a rural area and then a child who lives in an urban area. And the children are between 8 and 12 years old. And they wake up and they go about their day, and you just follow this child around for their day, what kind of chores they do, what they eat, where they go to school, what their parents do, what their families do. And my kids have really loved that because they love to see how kids in other parts of the world live. And so I think that's just a great way for kids to be able to see what it looks like to live in another context.
Yeah.
So that one. And then there's another thing that we've used called Passport to the Nations. And it is a curriculum that was written by a friend of mine. And some people use it in homeschooling, but it can also be used in a church setting. And that is great because it goes through different countries. And again, it's just helping them with that global perspective. So it depends on what age kids you have. It could be coloring a map of that country. It could be coloring a flag of that country, learning about the culture of the country. And again, just helps to broaden that worldview. And, I would just love to say that a lot of times people think, oh, well, these type of resources are just for families who homeschool. We happen to homeschool, but it's not just a homeschooling curriculum. And Bailey, you and I were talking about this earlier, that even if you're not home educating your children, math, science, all these different things, every parent is teaching their child something at home. Right. And so we are helping to form their worldview by conversations we have, by books that we read, by prayers that we pray. And so this is something every believing family can incorporate into their home. And then the last one I would mention would be missionary biographies by YWAM Publishing. And they have different levels of these. So they have some that are illustrated that are great for younger kids. And then they also have some that are more for middle grades. And they're books. They're also audiobooks. And as a family, we have just loved listening to these stories just to gain a global perspective.
I love that.
So where can people who are listening, where can they find Stand For Orphans and then also Lifeline on the internet?
Okay, so if you'll just go to lifelinechild.org, and then that's our main website. And then for Stand, it's standfororphans.com and .org. It takes you to the same place. And so we also have Instagram pages. We also have a Facebook page for Stand with lots of ideas. There's also a Pinterest page that has lots of ideas. And on the Pinterest page, it'll say ideas for fall stands, ideas for winter stands, that kind of thing. So those are great resources as well.
Yes. Following along on social media is how I saw the idea about the birthday party a couple days too late.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold on to that for next year because she's always going to have an August birthday.
Yes, and it's always hot.
And it's always going to be hot. Yes.
Okay, so shifting gears just a little bit so we can get to know you a little bit more.
Sure.
Tell us something that you are loving and something that you are leaving right now.
Okay. Well, something that I love are Young Living essential oils. I've been using essential oils for about 6 years, and I truly don't know what I did before that, because anytime some little issue comes up in our family, I just automatically think, oh, I can put lavender on that, or
right.
I can put purification on that.
Right.
One reason I love Young Living is just because it's more than essential oils. They have skincare products. They have home cleaning products. And so I love being able to eliminate toxins from our home and try to make it as clean as possible. So that's what I'm loving.
Okay, so what are you leaving?
What am I leaving? I've just been convicted recently about what I say yes to and what I say no to. And, I feel like sometimes when we get asked to do things, we just feel like, oh, I should just say yes. I should just say yes. But when you say yes to one thing, you're actually saying no to something else. And we all have the same amount of time in a day. And I have struggled a lot with some health issues. And so I feel like I have limited time because I sleep a lot. I have to. Therefore, I have to be careful what I say yes and no to. So for me, my main priorities right now are my children. I only have each of them in my home for 18 years. And I don't want to say yes to something that can take me away from my children at this point, because I'll have time once they're gone to do other things. And obviously you can tell I'm passionate about Lifeline. And so I love doing what I can to to help is, anybody and everybody with things regarding Lifeline. So I just have to be careful what I say yes and what I say no to.
Yeah. A lot of wisdom in that.
Yes, we are all about letting go of the guilt on saying no. So, and I think too, stop assigning guilt to people whenever their yeses and nos don't make sense to you.
Right.
Because I know a lot of times our family, the yeses and nos don't make sense, but they're so intentional.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And for a lot of other families, it's the same way. So,
well, and for us, like I said, just with my health issues that I have, I just have to be careful about how much we do outside the home. And if we have something every single night of the week, I feel like a crazy woman.
Right.
And so we have just decided that we're going to limit our outside activities. We obviously want our kids to be well-rounded, but that doesn't mean that we need to be feeling crazy going somewhere every night week. And I feel like if sometimes people neglect, spending that quality one-on-one time with their children because they're driving them here and there. And so, I guess I would just tell people to pray and ask the Lord for wisdom on what is best for your family to be involved in at that time.
Yeah.
Stand For Orphans is a great one to be involved in.
Right. Say yes to that. Right. Well, it doesn't take up that much time. Yeah. It's such a great opportunity to teach your kids about other kids around the world and about the importance of like philanthropy and raising money for causes that count, but you're not committing to 6 months, 3 nights a week.
That's right. And for families who don't have the opportunity to travel and they think, well, I can't go visit the orphan, but I can do something here with my time, with my family, with my children, that will bring a greater impact globally.
Yes.
Love that. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yes, we've enjoyed.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I hope that a lot of people will be inspired to get out and do this with their kids, but then also will just stop and think about ways that they can help their kids
they can
start thinking
shift
about
the
others.
culture in their home to being more world-centered.
Yeah, as long as our kids are living in the house, it's not too late.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
So, awesome. Well,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
You.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Have a good day.